Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here today. We are gathered on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I also want to acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection and history with this land. I'm joined today by Jennifer Kremenick, the Executive Director of Harvest Hills Cares Calgary, a nonprofit focused on supporting the people of Calgary during this affordability crisis. We stand here on behalf of the many Alberta families we have heard from who are facing skyrocketing utility bills. Tomorrow is the end of the month. You should all have your rebates at this point. If the UCP had accepted our amendments instead of complaining about having to do their jobs, you would have them. We brought your concerns to the legislature. We urged the UCP to take action to ensure that Albertans are protected from these out-of-control costs. We even brought solutions. We proposed legislation that would extend the ban on utility shutoffs through the rest of the year. We advocated for price protections and an inquiry into what led these costs that are pushing many Alberta families to the brink. On Thursday, the legislative session of the Alberta legislature adjourned. The government House leader praised the government for their progress on many legislative bills. But what they didn't do is anything at all about your bills. It has been over 100 days since the UCP promised to take action on utility bills. They since promised $150 in electricity rebates and a natural gas rebate. The amount of money they have promised doesn't go nearly far enough. But even 100 days after first promising these meager rebates, the UCP can't answer simple questions of when Albertans might actually see the money. The government House leader even said that details were still being ironed out and that they hoped to know soon when Albertans could expect the money they promised them months ago. It's just not good enough. Our caucus presented amendments that would have ensured accountability on utility bills and would have put money in Albertans' pockets by the end of May. That's tomorrow. So while the UCP has left the legislature focused on their internal drama and infighting, Albertans continue to struggle. An NDP government would never have allowed electricity bills to skyrocket like this, and we would have ensured that your natural gas rebates arrived as promised. Thanks to the UCP incompetence, Albertans can expect to wait weeks more, possibly even months. This is a failure of leadership. Today, I'm calling on the UCP to demonstrate some transparency and give Albertans a date when they can expect to see their rebates. Today, we're asking for action. For the UCP to get these rebates out to Albertans. The situation is getting worse. Natural gas surged over $9 per million BTUs last week, and it's the highest in 14 years, and a 200% increase year over year. And projections from analysts over the weekend suggest it could be headed over $10 very soon. The Market Surveillance Administrator released projected electricity rates for 2022 earlier this month and found the cost will be higher than last year across every major provider. Credible analysts believe costs will continue to increase. This, after months of high costs have already forced many families into debt. I have some simple requests for the government. First, no more political games and no more waiting. Provide a clear timeline for the delivery of rebates. Enough dallying and complaining that it's hard to do their jobs, enough blaming utility providers. The government has the power to make it happen, and they should do it. Second, provide a clear timeline for natural gas rebates. They're supposed to come into effect at $6.50. Prices are now over $9 and headed to $10. The UCP have waffled on whether they are coming in October or sooner. They should provide a clear answer. Third, the UCP must require reporting of disconnections and load limiters. Utility companies have said that full shutoffs are rare, but the providers have no data on exactly how many people are going without electricity or without heat. This is unacceptable. Load limiters constrain usage. They can be extremely problematic for families. Albertans deserve to know how many families are facing these struggles. We need to understand the scope of the problem so we can take meaningful steps to fix it before it gets worse. Last week, our staff were talking to Albertans who are feeling helpless as their bills pile up. One individual told them that they contacted their utility company for help, just as the UCP suggested they should. They asked for advice on how to lower their costs. They were told they're probably using the stove too much. That's right. These are stories from families facing unimaginable stress and unthinkable decisions about whether to put food on their table or keep the lights on. These have become all too common. Jennifer hears from them all the time in the work she does at Harvest Hills Cares Calgary. We need action. We stand together today calling for action on behalf of Alberta families. I will now turn things over to Jennifer, and then we can both take your questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Harvest Hills Cares Calgary is a volunteer-run nonprofit that is focused on supporting Calgarians during these very difficult times. And we have been working on this since the city shut down in March of 2020. We are working with people to help them with emergency food hampers and utility help and rental help. These past weeks, months, and years, though, we have seen and worked with countless Albertans, single parents, and seniors that are struggling with the cost of living crisis. On average, we get between 15 and 30 requests for assistance in a single day. But recently, there have been days and weeks where our volunteer-run organization gets more than 100 requests in a day. We hear from people who have had to go without groceries in order to ensure they can keep a roof over their heads, keep the lights on, and keep the heat on. We hear and work to help families that can't afford to purchase the food or new clothes or shoes that their children need because they need to afford to be able to live and keep a roof over their heads and the lights on. These Alberta families need help, be it buying them a birthday cake for their child that they might not have been able to afford, or helping them afford to fill up their gas tank so they can drive their children to school, or even helping those in need afford the medication that they need to be able to survive. But these Albertans might not be able to afford to because of the huge cost of living in Alberta. I do not think that many Albertans realize just how many people are struggling and how difficult it has been for so many. I know of people that have had load limiters put on their accounts and their homes because they've been unable to pay their bills. That's effectively meaning their power will be shut off if they use more than a certain ampage, making their lives and the lives of their children even more difficult. What's adding to these difficulties is an extreme lack of support from the Alberta government. Albertans here in Alberta need a government that will actually stand up and do something about the crisis that's impacting many of Albertans. The UCP has the power to do something, actually do something, but they have failed. These rebates would have actually had the power to help these struggling Albertan families. We have one client who was facing a power shutoff and disconnect because they were only $114.10 behind on their bill. If these rebates were delivered, it could have made the difference for them and many others. She wouldn't have been disconnected. But to date, I don't know of a single Albertan that has received these rebates that were promised in early February and March. It's now June. It's the end of May, and not nearly has been done from the Alberta government. The government must do more immediately. Thank you.
We're happy to take your questions now.
Okay, we'll now move to questions on the line. Just a reminder to use the raise hand function to join the queue. Seeing no no questions, that's all for today.
Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry, we got one here. Go ahead, Shalon, your launch is open.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Just checking. Thank you for taking my question. I'm just wondering, outside of what you've articulated in terms of a clear timeline for electricity and natural gas and those rebates, as well as the disconnection shut off, I'm just wondering what other, I guess, would you like to see the government go further in terms of providing additional rebates? We've heard the Premier hint a few times that more help might be coming this summer if he deems it's necessary. I guess, what would you like to see in that form?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to see is for this government to start listening to Albertans, because what they do should be based on that. And I think certainly we have been inundated with phone calls and emails and all sorts of contacts that suggest that $150 is definitely not enough. You know, there's a number of options that are available to the government. They could bring back in the rate cap, they could provide sort of larger rebates. In terms of natural gas, just having a timeline even, you know, the government keeps hinting at this and that, but I mean, hints aren't helpful to Albertans. We're hearing stories, just like what was mentioned, of someone who is facing disconnection for $114. Well, if the rebates were in their hands, they wouldn't be facing disconnection. So I think the government owes it to people to provide them with something significant, and I think they owe it to people to provide that to them in a timely manner. I mean, there's a number of other steps the government could take in terms of, you know, reversing the tax increases they've made, re-indexing things like seniors benefit and child tax benefit and AISH that are really impacting families that are struggling the absolute most. They could do something, they could put the cap back on insurance rates, which have massively skyrocketed. They could stop raising tuition. There's any number of things they could do. And I think the point is they should be out there talking to Albertans and really understanding what the challenges are that they're facing.
Did you have a follow-up, Shalon?
I did, yeah. Just in regards to the response that I received from Minister Nixon when I asked him about this on Thursday, just in regards to when we can expect a date to see actually these rebates, he sort of laid the blame at your party's feet in saying that it was a long drawn-out process in the legislature to get this bill passed due to, I think, some of the amendments that you had kind of mentioned. So I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that because it's absolutely absurd. We're talking about rebates that were promised over 100 days ago. The bill was before the legislature for 6 days, 3 of which weren't even sitting days. And it was before the legislature even for more than 1 day because we were fighting the UCP government to try to put a timeline in on providing rebates. So they could have just accepted our amendments and moved on. But they chose not to. There were a number of options available to them. You know, they promised the rebates, and then they sort of dilly-dallied and dithered about how they were going to do that. If you want to pass a bill through the House quickly, it's extremely easy. You talk to the opposition party about the bill before it's introduced and they can raise their concerns. Instead, they delayed for, I mean, the legislative session started on the 22nd of February. They didn't even introduce the bill for over a month. And so the suggestion that, you know, with over 100 days on the books, that the 6 days is the problem is just completely absurd.
Any other questions, Shalon?
Sure. I mean, if I have you. The one thing that I was noticing is the gas tax holiday that the province is pointing to as a significant help for Albertans since introduced on April 1st. My understanding is it's only in place for 3 months. So it's a 3-month window to end at the end of June, which is already going to be quickly approaching. We haven't heard anything about an extension of this. I guess I'd like to know your thoughts if you'd like to see that 13-cent rebate at the pump continue, or if there are other ways that we ought to be, other things we need to be considering right now.
Yeah, I think if the costs continue to stay high, that's definitely something they should be looking at. When we originally sort of proposed this idea, one of the things we talked about was that, you know, it's in place for 3 months and then you reassess. And if costs are still sort of excessive relative to what Albertans can afford, which it's my understanding they definitely are, it should continue going forward. Although another thing they really ought to consider doing that we've asked them to do is to do an audit to make sure that those savings are actually making it all the way through to families, that they're not being pocketed by companies, because right now we just don't have that information.
Any other questions, Shalana?
No, I think that's all of them. Thank you so much,
Thanks
though.
very much.
And seeing no other questions, that's all for today.
Thanks so much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.